The hall that laughed. The translator bead in my ear crackled twice before the doors opened, which was the only warning I got that the sound inside would be unlike anything I had ever heard in my life. It was laughter, not polite laughter, not the kind that floats over a dinner table. It was the deep rolling species-wide laughter of 60 alien civilizations who had already decided what I was before I walked through the door. I heard clicks and hisses and low harmonic pulses that my translation bead rendered, inadequately as amusement. The Grand Convocation Hall of the Galactic Council seated 4,000 representatives across luminous rising tiers. The ceiling was so high it had its own weather. Small clouds drifted near the apex, lit from below by bioluminescent panels. I walked in alone. My name is Cale Morrow. I was 41 years old, a former field diplomat who had spent 14 years negotiating trade terms in the most difficult corners of Earth. I had sat across tables from warlords, crime councils, and collapsed governments. I had never in my life felt as small as I did in that first step through those doors. The floor was a pale, translucent material, and beneath it you could see something moving. Slow, dark shapes like deep ocean creatures behind glass. I did not let myself look down for long. The chamber fell into a managed quiet as I reached the speaker's platform. It was a circular raised disc, lower than every tier surrounding it. They had built the room so that whoever stood at the center was always looking up. I noticed that immediately. I filed it away. There was no chair for me. I had been told there would be a chair, there was not. I stood. The presiding delegate that cycle was a Vorkai named Savar. The Vorkai were an ancient species, seven-limbed, with chromatic skin that shifted colors the way a human face shifts expressions. When Savar looked at me, his skin moved through 3 shades in under a second. My bead translated the color pattern as something close to mild contempt. Savar spoke. The bead rendered it as, "The planet called Earth has submitted a formal petition for transit lattice access and a provisional seat on the Resource Arbitration Board. The Council acknowledges receipt. The delegate may speak." I had prepared for 6 months. I knew every line. I spoke clearly and without hurry. I presented Earth's case the way you present a logical argument to a reasonable audience. I explained our population, our resource needs, our readiness to contribute to the Lattice Maintenance Fund. I described our technological development curve, our interplanetary infrastructure, our diplomatic record. I used numbers, because numbers do not carry the nervousness in a voice. No one interrupted me. That was the frightening part. They did not interrupt because they were not really listening. The 4,000 representatives of the Galactic Council watched me the way you watch a child trying to explain something very adult at a dinner party. Tolerant patient, waiting for the performance to end. When I finished, Savar spoke again. The Council notes Earth's ambitions with interest, a pause. However, the lattice requires member species to demonstrate a sustained period of non-aggressive planetary governance. Earth's recorded history presents significant obstacles to this qualification. Another pause, longer. The Council's assessment files classify the Terran species as Category 3. I heard a sound ripple through the chamber. The bead gave me the word amusement. A delegate from the far upper tier, a species I had not been briefed on, called something out. The bead took a moment. Then children who play with fire near the nest. More sounds, more translated amusement. Savar raised 2 of his 7 limbs for quiet and got it immediately. The Council offers the Tehran delegation an observer tier placement, non-voting, non-speaking, a courtesy access to proceedings, renewable on a cycle basis. His chromatic skin flashed something the bead rendered as settled. This is the Council's decision. I stood there for a moment, the floor hummed under my feet. Somewhere above me, 4,000 alien beings were already moving on. Already speaking to each other in quiet side channels, already forgetting that I was standing in the center of their room. I said, I accept the observer tier placement. I said it without any emotion I was willing to share. Savar nodded, his limbs folding. The session is concluded. That was it. Earth's petition, 6 months of preparation, 14 years of my career, concluded in the time it takes to drink a cup of tea. A council aide, a young Darathi with pale blue skin and very careful eyes, led me out through a side corridor. The Darathi were quieter than the others. This one said nothing to me for 2 full minutes. Then, near the end of the corridor, without turning to look at me, she said something very soft. The bead took a moment with it. The Category 3 file was written 400 years ago. It has not been updated. I looked at her. She was already walking ahead, her back to me, her posture perfectly neutral. I rode the shuttle back to Earth's orbital station alone. The station was a modest thing. 1 main hub, 3 docking arms, a crew of 62. Compared to the Council's infrastructure, it looked like a first draft. I sat in the observation bay for a long time without moving. Then I pulled out my recording device and filed my official report. I covered the proceedings. I covered the council's decision. I covered the observer tier terms. I described the chamber, the delegates, the structure of the vote. At the very end, I paused the recording. I sat with the silence for a moment. Then I pressed record again. "They don't know what they just did," I said. I stopped the recording and sent it to Earth. Outside the observation bay window, the stars did not move. They never move. They only look like they do when you are the one traveling toward them. I had a feeling Earth was about to start moving very fast. What we buried in ourselves, I landed in Geneva 31 hours after the council session and walked directly into a closed briefing with the Unstellar Affairs Directorate. No rest, no change of clothes. The Directorate had requested an immediate debrief, and when the Directorate requested something, it was not a request. The room was underground, and all it was with the Directorate. They had a philosophy about ceilings. The lower they were, the more serious the conversation. This ceiling was very low. Director Leon Ford sat at the head of the table. Leon was 60, built like a former infantry officer, which he was, and had the habit of folding his hands flat on the table when he was thinking hard. They were flat on the table when I walked in beside him, sat Dr. Yara Solis, chief xenobiologist. Yara was the kind of scientist who made other scientists nervous. Not because she was aggressive, but because she asked questions nobody else had thought to ask yet, and then answered them before you finished nodding. She had a coffee mug that said something funny in Portuguese. I never asked what it said. The rest of the table held 6 other Directorate members, 2 of them military advisors, whose names I had not been cleared to know. They had name placards that said Advisor 1 and Advisor 2. I had always found that detail either very professional or very alarming, and I had never decided which. I gave the full briefing, everything Savar, the laughter, the Category 3 classification, the observer tier, the aid in the corridor, all of it. When I finished, the room was quiet for about 4 seconds. Leon said, "Category 3, pre-sapient aggression phase," I said. "They're words." Yara uncapped her pen and wrote something in her notebook. She had paper notebooks. She said screens were too easy to hack and paper was harder to read upside down. "They expect us to destroy ourselves within 200 years, she said, not as a question. That's what the classification implies. Leon's hands were still flat on the table. He looked at them for a moment. "How old is the classification?" The aide suggested 400 years. Unofficial comment. She may have been speaking out of turn, or she may have been doing something deliberate. I don't know which yet. Yara finished writing and looked up. A 400-year-old threat assessment, written when we were still in the early industrial period. They looked at us once and filed us away. Yes, the room was quiet again. One of the unnamed advisors said, "What is the practical consequence of the observer tier? Legally speaking, observer tier members have no voting rights, no speaking rights, and no formal recognition in council proceedings. We can attend open sessions. We have access to the public record archive. We are functionally guests. But we're inside," Leon said. "We are inside." He nodded slowly. His hands came off the table. Yara. Yara opened a folder and slid it to the center of the table. 2 weeks ago, a Darathi contact forwarded a partial copy of the council's Terran assessment file. It arrived through an intermediary, no fingerprints. She looked at me briefly. "I believe you may have met the source." I did not say anything. "The file is 40 pages, Yara continued. It covers Terran biology, sociology, military history, and projected development arcs. It is thorough in the way that old research is thorough. Comprehensive on facts, completely wrong on conclusions." She turned a page. "They know everything we have done. They understand nothing about why we did it." She talked for 20 minutes. I had been a diplomat for 14 years, and I had sat through hundreds of briefings. But Yara Solis could hold a room better than anyone I had ever met, because she never made you feel like you were receiving information. She made you feel like you were discovering it alongside her. The core of what she said was this. The Council looked at Earth's history of conflict and saw evidence of a species that had not yet learned to govern itself. They were not entirely wrong about the history, but they had missed the mechanism underneath it. Every other spacefaring species the Council had cataloged had developed cooperative social structures before they developed advanced technology. They had, effectively, grown up in peace and then reached for the stars. Humans had done the opposite. We had fought our way through every stage of development. We had taken the worst impulses that nature had built into us and run experiments on them, at scale, over thousands of years. We had paid extraordinary costs for those experiments. We had lost entire generations. We had collapsed civilizations and rebuilt them. We had made agreements, violated them, suffered for it, and made better agreements. We had done this over and over and over again, and each time we had come back with a slightly better understanding of what not to do. The Council's file saw the violence and classified us as primitive. It did not see that we were, in a specific and hard-earned way, the most experienced species in that chamber at the one thing that mattered most, recovering from failure. They think our history makes us lesser, Yara said, closing the folder. They have not considered that it might make us more difficult to surprise. Leon looked at me. You want to stay in the observer tier. It was not quite a question. Yes, I said. Why? Because they just told me everything. They told me who votes with whom, what they protect, what they fear, where the alliances hold and where they crack. They told me all of that by letting me sit in the room and assuming I was harmless. I paused. The observer tier is not a consolation prize. It is the best intelligence position on this side of the galaxy, and they handed it to me because they were laughing too hard to think about what they were doing. The table was quiet. Leon said, "What do you need? I had a list." I gave it to them. It was not a short list. Over the following weeks, I watched Earth move in a way I had not seen in my lifetime. There was no announcement. There was no speech. There was no public declaration of intent. That was the part that impressed me most, the restraint. Earth had spent its entire history being loud about its ambitions, its conflicts, its struggles. This time, the decision was made quietly, in low-ceilinged rooms, by people who had read a 40-page alien file and understood exactly what it meant. The lattice physics papers were already public record, accessible through the Council archive system that my observer credentials now unlocked. They were written in a mathematical language it took our best physicists 8 months to fully translate. After that, it took them another 6 months to realize the Council had, in their confidence, published their own engineering principles in open academic journals, because they could not conceive of a species reading them and actually building anything. Our physicist built things. I stayed in my observer seat. I watched Sava run 63 sessions over the next 2 years. I watched him vote. I watched him make deals. I watched which delegates he greeted warmly and which ones he did not greet at all. I watched the Vorkai move resources toward the outer reaches of the galaxy, slowly, steadily, the way a tide moves, easy to miss if you are not paying attention. I paid attention. The Durathi, aide whose name I eventually learned was Ella, occasionally passed me printed documents in the corridor. Always brief, always factual, always technically available through the public record if you knew exactly which archive to search and exactly which indexing code to use. She gave me the codes. She never explained why. I never asked. Back on Earth, in the 14 months after my initial briefing, 3 things happened that the Galactic Council did not know about. The first was that Earth completed its initial jump gate prototype in a test configuration in the asteroid belt. It was unstable and it only held a window for 6 seconds, but it held. The second was that a Terran exploration vessel, the Long Reach, made contact with a species called the Cathari, who lived in a system the Council had marked in their own files as containing, quote, uncontactable primitives, end quote. The Cathari had a functioning orbital program, a written legal code, and a deep suspicion of strangers that they set aside after the Longreach crew spent 3 weeks helping them repair a failing atmospheric processor on their second moon. Humanity's first act of interstellar diplomacy outside the Council framework was fixing someone's air supply. The third thing was quieter than both of those. Leon Ford retired from the directorate and was replaced by his deputy, a woman named Claire Owens, who had a lower ceiling philosophy than even Leon. Claire called me on a secured line and said 6 words. "We are not petitioning them again." "No," I agreed. "Keep watching," she said. "I will," I said. She ended the call. I sat in my small office near the Council district, in a building that housed lower-tier diplomatic staff from a dozen minor species, and I looked at my wall, which was covered in printed pages from the Council archive. I had been in that observer seat for 2 years. I had a feeling I would be there for a while longer. I did not mind. I had always been good at waiting. It was one of the few things my career had taught me that I was genuinely grateful for. Outside my window, a Council transport moved silently between 2 towers, its running lights blue and steady in the dark. I turned back to my pages and kept reading. 12 years of silence on the morning of the day. Everything changed. I had a cup of tea and read through the proceedings agenda for the 44th session of the cycle, which listed nothing unusual. Resource allocation reviews, 2 border disputes, a proposal from the Sithani Federation about lattice maintenance fees. Routine. I had read through thousands of these agendas. I had been in the observer tier for 12 years. My hair had gone gray at the temples. I had developed a preference for a particular tea that could only be sourced from a small Durathi export shop, 3 streets from the council district. I had read every open archive file the council had published in 400 years. I had filled 61 notebooks. I had sent 11,000 encrypted reports to Earth. The council still did not know my name. I do not mean that as a complaint. It was, as I had noted on the day I accepted the position, the most valuable operational fact in the galaxy. I sat in the observer tier, which was a high gallery at the rear of the chamber, partially screened by a translucent barrier. The barrier was supposed to give observer tier delegates a clear view of proceedings. What it actually did was make us slightly blurry from the chamber floor. We were visible, technically, we were not seen. Savar had noticed me exactly once in 12 years. It was in the corridor after a long session, and he had looked at me for a moment with the chromatic flicker that my bead rendered as vague recognition, the way you might recognize a piece of furniture you have walked past every day without really looking at. Then he had looked away and kept walking. That had been year 4. In the years since, Earth had not been idle. The jump gates were no longer a prototype. 3 of them now existed, registered to private scientific foundations that were not registered to anything the council tracked. They were positioned outside traditional lattice corridors, in regions the council's maps marked as transit inefficient. Those regions were transit inefficient by lattice standards. By our own gate standards, they were perfectly placed. The Long Reach had made contact with 11 more species in 12 years. 4 of them were trading partners. 2 had signed educational exchange agreements. 1, a species called the Marin, had a population of 12 billion, a functioning space navy, and had been classified by the council as, quote, dormant non-spacefaring, end quote, because the council's last survey of their system had been 300 years ago, and they had not had spacecraft at the time. They had spacecraft now, very good ones actually. The Marin ship designers were extraordinary, and they were delighted to have someone to talk to. The Terran Compact had not been announced publicly. It had not been announced at all. It existed in agreements between governments, signed and filed, and very carefully not mentioned in any communication, that touched a council-accessible network. Then the Vorkai moved on Cathari. I had been watching the Vorkai's resource movements for 9 years. The pattern was unmistakable once you knew what to look for. A slow encirclement, resource posts established in adjacent systems, diplomatic pressure applied to neighboring species to sign non-interference agreements. It was how they had absorbed 4 other systems in the past 2 centuries. The council knew. The council had consistently voted that it fell within sovereign expansion rights. Kethari was different. Kethari was one of ours. I was in my observer seat when the annexation vote came to the chamber floor. Savar presided with his usual efficiency. The vote was brief, 41 for 12 against, 7 abstentions. The Vorkai were authorized to proceed with their integration plan for the Kethari system. Ayla was not in the chamber that session. She had transferred to a different division 3 years prior, which I had noted and accepted. The Darathi had given me enough. I did not need them to give me more. I sat very still. The session moved on to the next item, Sithani maintenance fees. I waited until a recess was called. I walked at a pace I kept deliberately calm to the secure communications alcove that observer tier delegates were permitted to use for diplomatic correspondence. I sat down. I composed a message of exactly 1 word on the encrypted channel to Earth's Stellar Affairs Directorate. The word was, "Now I sent it." Then I walked back to my seat and listened to the rest of the session. It took 3 days for the Vorkai fleet to reach the Kethari system. They traveled through the lattice, which was fast and efficient and required council authorization codes, which they had. 17 vessels. A standard integration formation, 2 forward, 12 mid-tier, 3 support. The Vorkai were experienced at this. They had done it before. They knew exactly how it was supposed to go. When they dropped out of transit at the edge of the Kethari system, 3 vessels were already in orbit around the main inhabited planet. The Vorkai fleet commander, a decorated officer named Varrock, had fought in 6 integration operations. He had never encountered resistance. The species being integrated were always small, always isolated, always without meaningful support. That was how the process worked. You selected the isolated ones. Varrock looked at his sensor display for a long moment. The 3 vessels in orbit were running no identification transponders. They were not on any council registry. They were not lattice authorized. They were simply there, holding position over a planet they apparently considered worth holding position over. Then they opened a broadcast channel, not encrypted. Open, anyone in the system could hear it. A voice came through, speaking in the council's standard trade language, calm and without any apparent urgency. This system is under the protection of the Terran Compact. All vessels not registered to the Compact or the Cathari government are requested to hold position. You have 6 hours to withdraw. This message will repeat. The message repeated. Varric looked at his officers. His officers looked at their instruments. Everyone in that bridge was very quiet for a moment. Then Varric sent a flash message to the Council, flagged urgent, requesting clarification on the identity of the Terran Compact and the legal basis for their presence in a system the Council had just authorized for integration. It was a fair question. Back in the Council District, in my small office 3 streets from the Darathi tea shop, I was already asleep. I had known the message was coming. I had gone to bed early. I had set an alarm for the morning, because I had a feeling tomorrow would require me to be well rested. The alarm went off at 6. I made tea. I sat by the window at 8:40. My council line communicator signaled. It was a council administrative aide, formal and very fast, informing me that an emergency session had been called, and that the Tehran delegation was requested to appear on the speaker's floor. Not the observer tier, the speaker's floor. I had not stood on the speaker's floor since the day I walked in 12 years ago, and found no chair. I finished my tea. I got my coat. I walked to the chamber at a pace I kept deliberately calm. The same pace I had used in the corridor 3 days ago. The same pace I had used on the very first day when I walked in through those enormous doors and heard 4,000 alien civilizations laughing. I had been waiting 12 years for this walk. I made it count. When the council called us monsters, the chamber was full. Every tier was occupied. I had never seen it that way. During regular sessions, roughly half the seats were taken, with delegates cycling in and out. Emergency sessions pulled everyone in. 4,000 representatives arranged in luminous rising tiers, and at the center on the speaker's disc, with no chair and no one beside me, stood Kale Morrow, ambassador without portfolio, observer tier delegate, a man the Galactic Council had not spoken to directly in 12 years. I had thought about what I would say, Savar began without ceremony. His chromatic skin was running through colors rapidly, which I had learned over 12 years indicated stress. This emergency session is convened to address an unauthorized military incursion into a council-designated integration zone. 3 unregistered Terran vessels positioned in the Cathari system in direct contravention of Council Resolution 479-12 passed 3 days ago. He paused. The Terran observer is recognized. I let the silence sit for exactly 3 seconds. Thank you, First Delegate. My voice carried fine. The chamber had excellent acoustics. I would like to begin with a point of clarification, I said. The vessels in the Cathari system are not military vessels. They are compact protection ships, operating under the authority of the Tehran Compact's Mutual Defense Charter, Article 7, which covers any compact-recognized sovereign nation that has requested protection status. The chamber had a baseline noise to it, even in quiet. Clicks, hisses, harmonic pulses, the ambient sound of 4,000 species breathing. That baseline dropped. The Cathari government, I continued, submitted a compact membership application 14 months ago. It was accepted 11 months ago. They are a recognized member of the Tehran Compact. They requested protection status 4 months ago, when Vorkai resource vessels began establishing positions in their adjacent systems. I paused. The compact protection ships are there because they were asked to be there by a sovereign government, which has the right to ask. Savar's skin ran through a sharp color I had not seen before. My bead gave me a word-controlled alarm. The Vorkai delegation was in their tier, 7 of them, and they were very still. When the Vorkai were still, they were either calm or furious. I had learned over 12 years that the difference was in the secondary limbs. Theirs were slightly extended. They were furious. Savar said, the Council has no record of this Terran Compact. It has not been registered with the Council. It has no legal standing under Council framework. Respectfully, I said, it does not need legal standing under Council framework. The Council framework governs Council members. Earth is an observer tier delegate, not a Council member. The Council framework does not restrict what observer tier delegates do in unaffiliated space. I let that land. I would point the chamber to the observer tier terms of engagement, Article 3, Paragraph 2, which specifies that observer delegates retain full sovereign rights to form external agreements not in conflict with Council law. We formed an external agreement. We are exercising sovereign rights. I paused. Which article of Council law does mutual defense violate? The baseline noise in the chamber shifted. It was not quiet. It was something more specific than quiet. Savar said, you are claiming a legal loophole. I am citing the document the Council asked Earth to sign 12 years ago, I said. I read it very carefully. I have had a great deal of time to read things. The Vorkai head delegate, Savar's counterpart in her delegation, rose. Her name, according to 12 years of session records, was Vorkai Council Voice Theron. She was the oldest member of the Vorkai delegation, and her chromatic patterns were very controlled. The Kethari system has been designated for integration under a lawful council resolution. The presence of these vessels is an act of interference in a council-sanctioned process. The resolution was passed 3 days ago, I said. The Kethari requested protection status 4 months ago. Their protection predates your resolution. I turned slightly so that I was addressing the full chamber rather than just the Vorkai tier. The council sanctioned an integration process for a system whose government had already signed a mutual defense treaty with another party. The council did not know about the treaty because the council has not spoken to Earth's delegation in 12 years. I paused again. The pause was intentional. Perhaps that was a communications failure we can all learn from. Several things happened in the chamber at once. Delegates in different tiers were speaking to each other on their internal channels. I could see it in the small movement of communication devices, the subtle shift in posture. Savar was speaking to an aide. The Vorkai delegation was speaking to each other. I stood still and let it happen. As I was very good at standing still, Savar called for quiet and got it more slowly than usual. The council will need to review the compact documentation. If the Terran delegation will provide, of course, I said. I had the documents ready. I had been ready for this for 11 months. I transmitted the full compact charter, membership list, and defense protocols to the council's official record intake system. It took 4 seconds. While the council reviews that, I said, I would like to address the characterization of Earth that has governed this chamber's view of my species for the past 12 years. I had not asked to add this to the agenda. I was on the speaker's floor, recognized mid-address. They could not stop me without formally removing recognition, which would take a procedural vote, which would take time, and which would itself become part of the public record. 12 years ago, said I stood in this room and made a reasonable request on behalf of my planet. The council classified Earth as Category 3, pre-sapient aggression phase. I looked around the chamber. That classification was written 400 years ago, when Earth had not yet developed powered flight. It has not been updated. It was used to deny Earth a voice in this chamber. It was used to approve the integration of systems whose populations are, by your own filing criteria, far less developed than Earth. I brought up the public record on the chamber display system. Observer-tier delegates had display access. No one had ever used it before. The Kethari were classified as Category 2, dormant non-spacefaring, 300 years ago. They have had a functioning space program for 112 years. The Marin, whom this chamber has never discussed, were classified as Category 1, pre-technological, 200 years ago. They have a fleet of 43 vessels. The Varath Collective, the Silith Confederacy, and the Orkai bands were all classified once, in their early development phases, and never reclassified. Because the council survey cycles are 400 years long and no one has checked. I let the display show the data. All public record. All right there, accessible to anyone with the right archive index. I had the right archive index. The chamber noise was at a level I had not heard before. Not laughter, not the managed quiet of a normal session. Something between attention and unease. The Terran Compact currently has 9 member species, I said. 4 of them appear in this chamber's records as non-spacefaring. 6 of them have been formally designated by council assessment as pre-sapient. They would like to say hello. I transmitted the contact details for each compact member government to the council record. Names, population counts, home system coordinates, and beside each name the council's own classification of them. The contrast, displayed in the chamber's own formatting, in the council's own official language, was very clear. Theron of the Vorkai was on her feet again. This is an attempt to destabilize established council order through manufactured controversy. Earth has operated outside council authority to build an unauthorized coalition. This is what happens, I said, and I kept my voice entirely level. When you tell someone to sit quietly in a gallery for 12 years and assume they are not paying attention. I looked at her directly. Ambassador Theron, your delegation laughed when I walked in here 12 years ago. I remember the sound. I have thought about it a great deal, I paused. I am genuinely curious what the joke was. The chamber was very quiet. Savar said, that is not a question the council is required to. It was not a formal question, I said. It was an honest one. Then Delegate Arun of the Durathi rose from his tier. Arun had replaced the previous Durathi head delegate 6 years ago. He was methodical and very precise. And he had never, in 6 years, done anything that I could characterize as surprising, he said. The Durathi delegation formally seconds the Terran Compact's legal argument regarding sovereign mutual defense rights. We request the Council defer the Cathari integration vote, pending a full review of Compact charter status. The chamber noise rose. I watched it. I counted the Sathani Federation delegate rows. The Sathani second the Durathi motion. The Orkai delegation rose. They were a small delegation, 3 members, and they were quiet in sessions. The Orkai band's support deferral. Theron's secondary limbs were fully extended now. Sasavar called for a procedural vote on deferral. It passed 44 to 23. The Cathari integration was suspended pending review. The Vorkai's 17 ships already in position had been ordered by Theron to hold and await council guidance. They were still there, but they were not moving. When the session was formally closed, I walked toward the exit. I was almost at the corridor when I heard my name spoken aloud. My name in the council chamber. It was Sasavar. I turned. He was standing at the edge of the speaker's disc. His chromatic skin was a color I had never seen from him before. The bead took a moment. It gave me 2 words. Something close to respect. He said nothing else. He turned back to his aides. I walked to the corridor. In my pocket, my communicator was already signaling. Earth, Claire Owens. I did not answer yet. I walked to the end of the corridor, past the place where Ayla had once told me about a 400-year-old file, and I stood at the window that looked out over the council district. The city below was enormous and ancient and very sure of itself. I thought about the first time I had walked in those doors, the laughter. The room built so that the person at the center always looks up. I had not looked up today. I pulled out my communicator and answered the call. Kale, Claire said. Director, I said. How did it go? I watched a council transport move between towers below, its lights steady in the gray morning. About how we expected, I said. Come home, she said. We have a great deal of work to do. I know, I said. I will be there soon. I put the communicator away and stood at the window a moment longer. There was a lot of work ahead. There always was. That was the part nobody talked about. The part that came after the moment everyone remembered. The actual, slow, careful work of building something that lasts. That was the part humans were very good at when they put their minds to it. I took a breath. Then I went to get my coat. The shape of what we are the Cathari integration vote was formally rescinded 4 weeks after the emergency session. Not because the council had a change of heart. The council did not work that way. It was rescinded because the legal review team assigned to examine the Terran Compact's charter found no clause in council law that the compact violated. And because 44 delegate bodies had already voted for deferral on the record, and because the Vorkai's 17 ships had been sitting in Cathari orbit for 4 weeks doing nothing, while the Compact's 3 ships did the same, and the spectacle of that standoff was becoming a subject of discussion in every corner of the galaxy that the Council would have preferred to keep quiet. The Vorkai withdrew on a Wednesday. I was not in the Council district when it happened. I was on Earth in Claire Owens' low-ceilinged office in Geneva, sitting across from her and 2 senior directorate advisors named Kate Fairley and Dan Cole, working through what would happen next. I had been home for 3 weeks. It was the longest stretch I had spent on Earth in 12 years. It felt strange in the way that familiar things feel strange when you have been away too long. The gravity was the same. The air smelled the same. Something in the proportion of things felt different, and I suspected it was me rather than the planet. Claire had not changed much in 12 years. She was leaner than when we had first spoken on that secured line, and her hair was entirely silver now, and she had developed a habit of tapping one finger on the table when she was working through a problem. She was tapping now. Full membership, she said. It was not a question. It was the shape of what we were discussing. Yes, I said. Not observer tier. Not observer tier. The Compact has 9 member governments. 6 of them are not in the Council. 3 of them are classified by the Council as non-existent in any meaningful capacity. If we petition for full membership now, we do not petition alone. We petition as the representative government of a recognized interstellar compact. Kate Fairley leaned forward. Kate was the Directorate's senior legal analyst and had spent the previous 3 weeks reviewing every line of Council charter with a team of 40. There is no provision in Council charter for block admission, she said. No precedent. There is also no provision against it, I said. She nodded slowly. Correct? Dan Cole, who was the Directorate's Strategic Affairs Director and had the look of a man who slept 4 hours a night and considered it generous, said the Vorkai will fight this. Theron almost certainly has enough allied votes to block a formal membership application. Theron had 42 allied votes before the emergency session, I said. The Durathi, the Sathani, and the Orkai bands have since requested compact observer status. They are not members yet. But they are no longer unambiguously in Theron's column either. I paused. Things have moved. The question is how fast. Claire stopped tapping. What do you recommend? I had been thinking about this for 12 years, in the sense that I had been watching the council for 12 years and learning its architecture. And I had been thinking about it specifically for 3 weeks, in the sense of sitting in my childhood home outside Edinburgh for 2 days between Geneva briefings, walking by the water, and turning the question over. Which was the way I had always done my best thinking, and which was I had decided long ago, not something I needed to explain or apologize for. We do not petition immediately, I said. We give it 90 days. We spend those 90 days doing what we do well, talking to people, not to the council, to the delegations inside the council, who have been sitting in their own version of the observer tier for longer than we have, the ones the council maintains as members in name, because their resources are useful and ignores in practice, because their voices are inconvenient. I looked at Claire. There are more of them than you might expect. I have a list. Kate said, how long is the list? 31 delegations, I said. I have contact files on all of them. I have been building those files for 9 years. Dan sat back in his chair. 31, plus 9 compact members, plus 3 compact observers, I paused. The council has 60 member species. We need 31 votes to block a censure and 31 votes to pass a membership motion. I am not counting votes we definitely have. I am counting votes that are available if we ask the right questions in the right way. The office was quiet for a moment. Claire said, what are the right questions? I thought about Ayla, who had handed me documents in a corridor for 6 years and never explained why. I thought about Delegate Aaron, who had risen from his seat at exactly the right moment and done something that I strongly suspected he had been thinking about doing for a long time before I gave him the occasion. I thought about the 31 files I had built, page by page, session by session, small detail by small detail, over 9 years of sitting in a gallery and watching people who assumed no one was watching. The right question, I said, is the one they already want to answer. Claire looked at me for a moment. Then she nodded. 90 days, she said. Put the team together. The 90 days were the most intensive of my career, which was saying something, given that the previous 12 years had not been restful. We did not hold press conferences. We did not issue statements. We worked through quiet channels, compact member governments, with existing relationships, trade connections, the natural network of species who had found each other at the edges of the galaxy that the Council's survey cycles had not touched in centuries. I traveled to 7 systems in 90 days, not aboard a Council lattice vessel, through our own gates, which were now running reliably, and which had been steadily and very quietly expanded to a network of 9. Gate travel was faster than the lattice in 3 out of 4 routes we had mapped, because our engineers, coming to the problem without the assumptions baked into lattice design, had found approaches the original lattice architects had not considered. The Marin were the most significant conversation. I went to their system personally. Their council was called the Resonance Assembly, and it met in a curved hall open to the sky, which I appreciated after 12 years of low ceilings and translucent barriers. The Marin head speaker was a woman named Siran, which translated roughly into the language of clarity, which I thought was a good name for someone who said what she meant. She was older than she looked, and had been running the Resonance Assembly for 20 years. She had a directness that I found immediately comfortable. She said, "You want us to join your petition. I want you to consider it," I said. "You have been spacefaring for 112 years. You have a fleet. You have a population of 12 billion. The Galactic Council classified you as pre-technological 2 centuries ago and has not checked since. You have been out here, doing what you do, without a voice in any framework that affects your systems." She looked at me. "And you are offering us a voice." "I am telling you that you already have one," I said. "You have had one for a century. You just have not had anyone standing with you when you use it." She was quiet for a moment. The open sky above the resonance hall was a deep green gold, the color of a world with a slightly different sun than mine. "Why would humans stand with us?" she asked. "What does Earth gain? What does any species gain from having neighbors it can count on?" I said. She looked at me for a while longer. "There is something specific about your species," she said. "I have been trying to name it since we began making contact with your people, the long-reach crew, your trade delegates. Now you," she paused. "You do not behave like a species that has been at the top of anything. You behave like a species that knows exactly what it is to need help and decided to be the kind of species that offers it instead of waiting. I thought about that for a moment. That is probably the most accurate thing anyone has said about us in a long time, I said. She signed the compact petition documentation 3 days later. We came to the formal petition date with 47 signed statements of support from council member delegations and compact affiliated governments. The session was packed. It was the largest attended council session in the record I had access to. I stood on the speaker's disc. I had stood there twice before. The first time I had been laughed at. The second time I had been challenged. This time, the room was simply very quiet, and the quiet had a different quality to it than anything I had heard in that chamber before. It was attention, real attention, the kind that happens when people understand that what they are about to hear will matter. I had written the address in Edinburgh, in the house I had grown up in, on paper, in pen, because Yara Solis had been right about paper, and I had read it over enough times that I no longer needed the paper. I will keep this short, I said. The Galactic Council has governed the spacefaring community of this galaxy for a long time. It has done some things very well. It has built infrastructure that connects civilizations that would never have found each other otherwise. It has maintained a standard of scientific record that has preserved knowledge across millennia. These are real achievements, and I do not diminish them. I paused. It has also made a habit of deciding, from a great distance and a very long time ago, which species are worth paying attention to. It has maintained classifications that were written before the classified species existed in their current form. It has authorized the absorption of governments that asked for something different, and received no answer from anyone who had the power to give one. I looked around the chamber. The Terran Compact exists because Earth was told to sit quietly, and we sat quietly. And while we sat, we talked to the species the Council was not talking to, and they had a great deal to say. I looked at the observer tier. High at the back of the chamber, behind the translucent barrier, there were 12 delegations seated there today. Small species, early contact worlds, a few that had been in that tier for decades, and had been neither helped nor harmed by the Council, simply ignored. Some of them were looking down at me. Earth is petitioning for full membership in the Galactic Council, I said. Not because we need the Council's permission to do what we are already doing. We are doing it. We have gates. We have a compact. We have partners. We are not asking for permission, I paused. We are asking to be in the room where decisions are made, because we have spent 12 years learning that the decisions this council makes affect everyone, including the people who are not invited to speak. Another pause. And because there are a great many species in observer tiers and non-member systems who deserve someone in this chamber who will say their name. The formal vote was called. It passed, not unanimously. Nothing important ever passes unanimously. It passed 49 to 26 with 11 abstentions, including the Vorkai delegation, who voted neither for nor against, and whose chromatic patterns, as the count was announced, I could not quite read from the floor. After the session ended and the chamber began to clear. I stood on the speaker's disc for a moment. There was no particular reason to stand there. The session was over. But I wanted to feel it. The floor under my feet, the ceiling high above, the room that had been built to make the person at the center look up. I looked up. The bioluminescent panels were the same pale light. They always were. The high ceiling was the same. Small clouds drifted near the apex. It was just a room. A very large room built by people who were very sure of themselves, which made them build it in a way that was meant to diminish whoever stood in the center. It had not worked. I was not sure it had ever worked on anyone in the whole history of the chamber I walked out. The corridor was quieter than usual. Most delegates had already moved to reception areas or transit connections. I was almost at the far end when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, the particular gait of a seven-limbed species whose secondary limbs provided balance. I stopped, I turned. Savar stood in the corridor alone, no aides. His chromatic patterns were subdued, a low, even tone I had not seen before. The bead translated it, slowly, as something that took several attempts to render. The closest it could get was something between acknowledgement and a kind of quiet work still to be done. First delegate, I said. Ambassador Morrow, he said. The bead gave me my name in his species' sound language. Before rendering it in mine, he had said my name. He looked at me for a long moment. You have been in this building for 12 years, he said. Yes, watching. Yes, he was quiet, his secondary limbs folded slightly. I reviewed the Category 3 file, he said. The original, 400 years old. The survey team that wrote it spent 11 days in your system. 11 days, he paused. They observed one conflict between two nation-states and concluded it was representative. 11 days is not very long, I said. No, he said. It is not. He looked at me steadily. I want to understand something. And I am asking it genuinely, not as a diplomatic formality. All right, I said. Your species has done extraordinary harm to itself across its history, not small harm. Large, sustained, catastrophic harm. And yet you built this, he gestured. Not at the corridor, but outward at all of it. The compact, the gates. The 49 votes, how? Not technically, not politically. I understand those mechanics now. I mean, how did you choose it? How does a species that knows how to destroy itself choose, over and over, to build instead? I had been asked versions of this question before. By Surin on her green gold world, by compact member delegates, by Yara Solis in a low sailage room in Geneva years ago. I had thought about the answer for a long time. We did not stop knowing how to destroy, I said. We never stop knowing that we carry it with us. Every generation knows exactly what the previous ones did and exactly what it cost. I paused. And every generation has to make the choice again, knowing the cost, knowing the capacity, choosing anyway. I looked at him. It is not that we evolved past the destruction. It is that we decided the destruction was the thing we were most afraid of becoming, and fear, when it is the right fear, is a very powerful motivator. Savar was quiet for a long time. We evolved towards stability very early, he said finally. We have not felt that fear in a very long time. He paused. Perhaps we stopped being careful about things we stopped being afraid of. Perhaps, I said. We stood in the corridor for a moment. Two diplomats, two species, a 12-year silence between them, and the particular awkwardness of a conversation that mattered more than either party had planned for when it started. Savar's chromatic patterns moved through a sequence I recognized after 12 years as a formal farewell gesture. Ambassador Morrow, he said. First delegate said. He turned and walked away. I stood in the corridor for a moment longer. Then I walked out of the building into the council district, into the air of a world that was not mine under a sky that was a slightly different shade of blue than the one I had grown up with. And I called Claire Owens. It passed, I said. I know, she said. We watched the feed a pause. How do you feel? I thought about that. The corridor saw us question, the 49 votes, the observer tier and the delegations in it who had looked down at me while I spoke. There is a great deal of work still to do, I said. Yes, Claire said. There is. Good, I said. I am very bad at retirement, she laughed. It was a good sound, a human sound, unambiguous and warm. Come home first, she said, at least for a week. A week, I agreed. I put the communicator in my pocket and started walking toward the transit hub. The city moved around me, ancient, enormous, the product of centuries of civilizations who had been very certain about their place in the order of things. I walked through it like I belonged there, because I did now officially on the record with 49 votes and a signed charter to prove it. That night on the transit back to Earth's gateway station, I opened my journal 60-second notebook. I had started it 3 weeks ago, when I came home from the council district for what I thought might be the last time in the observer tier. I wrote, they mocked us because they thought our history made us lesser. They looked at what we had done to each other and saw evidence of something unfinished, something dangerous, something not quite ready to be trusted with the wider world. They were not wrong about the history. We did those things, all of them. We carry every one of them, but they misread the evidence. Every scar a species carries is either a wound that never healed or a lesson that was paid for and kept. We chose imperfectly across centuries to do the second thing, not always, not cleanly, but enough times with enough people who refused to accept that the worst of what we had done was the final word on what we were, that it added up to something. It added up to tonight. I am going home for a week, then there is work to do. The observer tier has 12 delegations in it, and I know all their names, and I know what they are waiting for. They will not wait much longer. I closed the journal. Outside the viewport, Earth's jump gate was a ring of soft light in the dark, our own design, our own construction, running quiet and steady in a corridor the council's maps had never charted. We passed through it, and we came home.